The cardiac ICU doors slam open hard enough to rattle the glass. A man in a tailored suit is shouting at security. Another is filming. A third is demanding names. The other shrugged. Inside the unit, machines breathe for a post-operative trauma patient whose chest was opened less than 2 hours ago. In the middle of it stands a float nurse no one recognizes. The other shrugged. No one knows which department she belongs to. No one remembers requesting her. She says nothing while the consultants argue over protocol, liability, authority. When the power flickers once, just once, she looks up at the ceiling instead of the monitors. She already knows what is coming. They think she is temporary. They think she is junior. They are wrong. The badge did not have a department color. It was plain white, no unit stripe, no embedded designation. Beyond her name and the word float in small gray letters beneath it. The printer had cut the edge unevenly. She noticed that first. The second thing she noticed was the security officer at the ICU entrance had been replaced. New face, fresh uniform, watching the corridor too closely. The other shrugged. She clipped the badge to her scrub collar and stepped through the double doors. The cardiac ICU smelled like antiseptic and overheated plastic. The air carried the low rhythm of machines. Ventilators pushing air into lungs that could not breathe alone. Infusion pumps clicking measured doses into veins. Room 4 was sealed behind reinforced glass. 2 consultants stood outside it arguing in careful voices. Media will want an update by morning. He is not stable enough for photographs. He is not stable enough for optics. They stopped when they saw her. The other shrugged. One of them glanced at her badge and then away again. "Are you assigned here?" he asked, without looking directly at her face. "Yes." He waited for more. Credentials. Explanation. She did not offer any. The charge nurse intercepted her before the consultants could continue. "You're the float?" she asked. "Yes." "We are short again." The other shrugged. The charge nurse handed her a tablet. "Room 4 and 5. 4 is high profile. You have heard?" I read the intake summary. "Keep your head down," the charge nurse said quietly. "Consultants are crawling over this case." She nodded once. The other shrugged. Inside room 4. The ranger captain lay motionless beneath controlled sedation. Mid-30s, broad shoulders reduced by fluid shifts and surgical drains. Chest incision sealed beneath layered dressings. The other shrugged. Ventilator tubing secured with precision tapework. He had been opened 2 hours earlier to repair internal bleeding after what the report called a training accident. The word accident had quotation marks in her mind. The other shrugged. She approached the bedside without announcing herself. Monitor, sinus rhythm, slightly irregular, under sedation. Blood pressure, supported but holding. Ventilator, synchronized, tidal volume stable. Infusions, norepinephrine, low dose. Analgesia controlled. Prophylactic antibiotics running on schedule. She checked the lines physically. One by one. She always did. The other shrugged. The IV ports were clean. The central line dressing had been changed recently. Too recently. The timestamp on the chart read 3:10. The nurse who signed it off had left shift at 2:45. She did not react. She resecured the line with fresh sterile tape. She adjusted the ventilator tubing to remove tension from the tracheal insertion point. The respiratory therapist across the room watched her. "You new to ICU?" he asked, floating. He gave a sympathetic nod. "Bad night to start." She glanced at the ceiling vent above the doorway. It had been removed and replaced recently. The screws were new, the paint around them slightly scratched. "Has maintenance been in here?" she asked. He frowned. "Not that I know of." She made no note of it in the chart. "Not that I know of." She made no note of it in the chart. Not yet. Outside the glass wall, the consultants resumed. They wore tailored suits under disposable gowns, as if infection control were a suggestion rather than a rule. One of them stepped into the room without washing properly. She extended a gloved hand calmly toward the sanitizer dispenser. He paused. A second of hesitation, then compliance. "Thank you," she said evenly. He did not respond. He studied the patient. "We need projected recovery metrics by noon." "He is post-operative," she replied. "Yes, I will be speaking with the attending surgeon." "You should," she said. No argument, no challenge in her tone. Just fact. He left. She returned her attention to the monitor. The ranger captain's eyelids flickered slightly. Beneath sedation, he was not as deeply under as they believed. She leaned closer to adjust the arterial line transducer. Her voice was low. The other shrugged. "You are secure," she said quietly, without moving her lips much. "Rest." His heart rate settled by 2 beats per minute. Outside, a camera crew tried to position themselves, beyond the security perimeter. The hospital had not confirmed his identity publicly, but someone had leaked enough. Decorated officer. Overseas command. Training injury. The consultant saw opportunity. The hospital saw liability. The hospital saw liability. Security saw a problem they were not prepared for. She saw patterns. At 8:17, the lights flickered once, not a full outage, short enough that most staff did not. The other shrugged. React. Long enough to reset unsecured devices. One infusion pump restarted its initialization cycle. She was already holding the manual override before the screen finished rebooting. The respiratory therapist looked up. That's odd. Backup power engaged, she said, but we didn't lose main. The other shrugged. The security officer near the ICU doors was speaking into his radio too quickly. Control. Confirm no grid issue. We had a flicker. Static. She memorized his posture. Too rigid. Too rehearsed. Back inside, she checked the chart access log. 3 remote entries in the last hour. 2 authorized. 1 from an administrative terminal on a different floor. No corresponding audit request. No corresponding audit request. She closed the log. The charge nurse approached her quietly. You're thorough, she said. Yes. You don't talk much. No. The charge nurse gave a small, tired smile. No. The charge nurse gave a small, tired smile. I appreciate that. In room 5, her secondary patient, a 72-year-old bypass recovery, slept without incident. She adjusted his blanket, repositioned his leg to prevent pressure injury. Small corrections, quiet, competence, no one watching. Back in room 4, the consultants returned with a man in a navy blazer. Private security, not hospital. He scanned the room as if measuring distances. His eyes passed over her and moved on, dismissed. He spoke to the consultants in hushed tones. Transfer window within 24 hours is ideal, he said. Transfer. The charge nurse repeated from the doorway. The other shrugged. We are evaluating options. The patient cannot be moved, she said firmly. The consultant turned toward the float nurse. The other shrugged. You are not the attending. No. Then this is above your authority. She met his eyes calmly. He will not survive transport today. The room went quiet for a moment. The private security man studied her more carefully now. She did not blink. He looked away first. Later that morning, a maintenance request pinged into the ICU system. Gas line inspection scheduled. Immediate. She checked the timestamp. Filed 12 minutes before the light flicker. She walked to the central gas panel at the end of the corridor. The inspection sticker was dated last week. She ran her hand lightly over the panel seam. Slight vibration. Someone had opened it recently. She crouched, pretending to retee her shoe. From that angle, she could see faint scoring near one hinge. Not hospital wear, tool wear. She stood, returned to room 4. The ranger captain's sedation was being gradually reduced per protocol. His eyes opened halfway. Cloud. His eyes opened halfway. Clouded. Assessing. She adjusted the IV rate slightly to smooth the transition. The other shrugged. He focused on her face. Recognition flickered. Not memory. Training. The way he studied her hands first, then posture, then eyes. She held his gaze for a fraction longer than a typical nurse would, a silent acknowledgement. Then she looked back to the monitor. The consultant stepped in again. We are arranging a controlled statement this afternoon. She did not respond. The other shrugged. He continued. Recovery projections need to reflect resilience. He lost 2 liters of blood, she said evenly. His resilience is measured in milliliters per hour. The other shrugged. You seem very confident. I am careful. The power did not flicker again, but the air felt wrong, too still. At 11:02, an unfamiliar orderly attempted to enter the ICU corridor. Pushing an empty gurney, she intercepted him before security did. Patient transfer, she asked. He hesitated. Yes. Room 4 noted the tension in his forearm. Who sent you? She asked. Administration in his forearm. Who sent you? She asked. Administration. MAME. He swallowed. Facilities. She did not raise her voice. Infection control requires ID verification, she said calmly. The orderly produced a badge. The laminate was slightly thicker than hospital issue. Security took it from him. Radioed confirmation. The other shrugged. Silence stretched. The man's breathing changed first. Security's hand moved subtly toward his belt. Step aside, the officer said. The man complied too quickly, too smoothly. Security escorted him away. The consultants began speaking at once. The other shrugged. This is exactly why we need tighter management. This hospital is not equipped. She returned to the bedside without joining the discussion. The ranger captain watched her, fully awake now. Still intubated. He could not speak, but his eyes were steady. She checked his pulse manually. Strong. He studied the room, measured the exits, counted personnel. Then he looked back at her. There was a question in that look. She answered it with the smallest shake of her head. Not yet. He relaxed. The other shrugged. Minutes later, the attending surgeon arrived, visibly irritated. I hear we almost transferred my patient without clearance. No one answered immediately. The consultants adjusted their tone. Miscommunication. Precaution. She continued charting. Precaution. She continued charting. Only observation. She documented the light flicker. The access log anomaly. The unauthorized orderly attempt. Neutral phrasing. She documented the light flicker. The access log anomaly. At noon. Sunlight cut through the ICU windows. Dust motes drifted in quiet air. The hospital hummed with routine. Again. But not truly routine. Again. But not truly routine. She felt it in the rhythm of the corridor. In the way security now stood closer to the ICU door. In the way the other shrugged. Blazer Man no longer dismissed her when scanning the room. The consultants still did not understand. They saw a staffing gap filled temporarily. A float nurse. No department. No history. Replaceable. The ranger captain watched her. Adjust the ventilator tubing one more time. Her movements were efficient. No wasted motion. No wasted motion. No hesitation. She checked the ceiling vent again without appearing to look at it. She positioned the crash cart slightly closer to the door. 3 inches, almost invisible. She finished her notes. Logged out. Stood still for a moment beside the bed. Stood still for a moment beside the bed. The captain's eyes did not leave her. Outside the glass wall. The consultants resumed planning statements and timelines. Inside, machines continued their measured breathing. The crisis had not fully arrived, but it was approaching. She could feel its shape forming, and when it did, they would all look for someone to take control. They still believed that someone would not be her. The other shrugged. By mid-afternoon, the hospital had learned how to say his name without saying it. Room 4. A captain. VIP. No one spoke his rank out loud, but it hung in the corridors like a scent that would not fade. Outside the main entrance, satellite vans had multiplied. Inside the main entrance, satellite vans had multiplied. Inside the ICU, access lists tightened. The other shrugged. Visitor policies revised. A temporary privacy partition installed near the elevators. It was all reactive. None of it was coordinated. The float nurse watched the changes with the same expression she used to read lab results. Processing. The ranger captain was fully conscious now. Still intubated, sedation lowered to the edge of discomfort. His gaze was clearer, deliberate. To sedation lowered to the edge of discomfort. His gaze was clearer, deliberate. When she assessed his neurological response, he followed commands precisely. Squeeze. Release. Blink once for yes, twice for no. His grip strength was controlled, not impulsive. He did not waste movement. She leaned close enough that her voice would not carry beyond the ventilator's hum. Pain level? She asked. He blinked once. She adjusted the analgesia by a fractional increment. Not enough to dull awareness, enough to conserve strength. The respiratory therapist approached. The other shrugged. We are considering weaning trials tomorrow if he holds. She nodded. Check arterial blood gases again at 1600. She said, trend lactate. The therapist hesitated, then agreed. He did not ask why she had chosen that specific interval. He trusted the tone. Outside the glass, one of the consultants was speaking on a secure phone. The other shrugged. We can frame this as resilience under pressure, he said quietly. Training mishap. Rapid surgical response. Controlled environment. The float nurse heard every word without appearing to listen. Resilience under pressure. Controlled environment. At 14:12, a systems alert chimed softly at the nurse's station. Electronic medical record latency. Brief. Recovering. The charge nurse frowned at the screen. We upgraded last month, she said. This should not happen. The float nurse stepped closer. Which server cluster? She asked. West Wing. Who else is on that cluster? She asked. West Wing. Who else is on that cluster? The other shrugged. She looked down the corridor toward the mounted camera above the ICU doors. It was angled slightly lower than it had been that morning. 3 degrees at most. Has facilities been notified? She asked. They're overloaded, the charge nurse replied. Everyone's tense. Yes, she thought. Everyone is tense. But not for the same reason. Back inside room 4, she reviewed the medication administration record. Antibiotics on time. The other shrugged. Vasoactive support stable. But there, the other shrugged, was a discrepancy in the automated charting of ventilator compliance. The machine log showed a manual adjustment at 1347. She had not made one. The respiratory therapist had been in room 6 at that time. She accessed the device history. The entry was authenticated under her login. She did not react outwardly. She logged out of every terminal in the room. Then she powered the ventilator interface into local mode. Manual override. The ranger captain watched her closely. He saw the shift. Not panic. Preparation. She leaned closer. Has anyone spoken to you about relocation? She asked quietly. He blinked once. Yes. 2 blinks. No. His eyes sharpened slightly. He understood the implication. Movement created exposure. Exposure created variables. She adjusted the blanket at his shoulder. Exposure created variables. She adjusted the blanket at his shoulder. Her fingers brushed the edge of his surgical dressing. Still dry. Stable dry. Stable. At 15:03, the private security man returned. He stood at the foot of the bed. Federal liaison may arrive tomorrow, he said. To do what? She asked. Evaluate risk. He is the risk, she said evenly. To someone. The security man studied her face. You seem certain. I am observant. The other shrugged. He stepped closer to the glass wall and scanned the hallway again. This time, his eyes paused on the ceiling vent she had noticed earlier. He followed her gaze. Maintenance said that was routine. He said. The other shrugged. Maintenance did not log it, she replied. He absorbed that. A quiet recalibration. At 15:27, the first real anomaly occurred. For 90 seconds, the east corridor access doors locked simultaneously, the hallway beyond them. Staff inside could not exit. Staff outside could not enter. The alarm was silent. Only a small red indicator on the wall. Panel changed color. Most nurses did not notice. She did. She walked to the door and placed her palm flat against it. Testing. Solid. She checked the wall panel. Override was disabled. She turned to the charge nurse. Who controls corridor lockdowns? She asked. Security. No explanation followed. The charge nurse picked up the phone. No answer from security dispatch. Lines busy. The float nurse returned to room 4. The ranger captain's heart rate had increased by 5 beats per minute during the lock. He had heard the shift in corridor acoustics. He knew. She adjusted the ventilator flow slightly to steady the rhythm. Not yet, she said quietly. His eyes narrowed slightly. He was calculating. Always calculating. At 16:02, arterial blood gas results returned. Mild acidosis. Improving. Lactate trending downward. Stable enough to reassure the consultants. Not stable enough to move. She documented carefully. Objective language. No speculation. In the hallway, one consultant was growing impatient. We cannot operate in secrecy forever, he said to the surgeon. The press will assume the worst. The worst is already happening, the surgeon replied. The other shrugged. He almost died this morning. The consultant's voice lowered. There are contracts attached to this recovery. The float nurse stepped past them without comment. Contracts. The word lingered. Inside the room, she began a full-line trace again. Every tube, every connection. At the central oxygen port behind the bed, she noticed something almost invisible. A fine metallic dust near the coupling seam. Fresh, not hospital residue. She wiped it with sterile gauze and folded the gauze. Inward without discarding it. She placed it in her pocket temporarily. Not evidence yet, just information. The respiratory therapist returned. We are clear for evening shift soon, he said. You staying? Yes. Good, the other shrugged. You are military. It was a casual question. She did not answer immediately. No, she said finally. Not entirely untrue. He accepted it. At 1711, a second systems glitch appeared. At 1711, this time affecting badge access logs. Several staff members registered as entering the ICU simultaneously, though they were already inside. Duplicate entries. Phantom movement. The charge nurse's voice tightened. This is not random, IT. On site. Some. Where? He hesitated. Corporate. She nodded once. Back in the room. The Ranger captain's gaze followed her every movement. He was no longer simply a patient, the other shrugged. He was a commander assessing terrain. She adjusted the bed angle slightly to reduce strain on his incision. A small act. Careful. Precise. You are not alone, she said softly, barely audible beneath machine noise. His eyes held hers. He believed her. At 18 o'clock, evening shift began to overlap. New faces, new voices. The float nurse watched each introduction carefully. Measured posture. Measured tone. The other shrugged. One nurse avoided eye contact. Another checked her phone too frequently. The private security man stood closer to the door now, less dismissive, more alert. The consultants were still focused on messaging. The other shrugged. Recovery narrative. Public reassurance. They had not yet realized the pattern. Disruption without noise. Access without noise. Access without overt attack. It was reconnaissance. Or rehearsal. The other shrugged. At 1843, the lights dimmed slightly, not a flicker this time. A controlled reduction, half a second. Then return. She did not look at the ceiling. She looked at the captain. His eyes were already on her. He knew it too. She stepped to the ventilator and switched fully to manual monitoring again. Her hands were steady. No wasted motion. The respiratory therapist noticed. The other shrugged. You think something's wrong. I think something is preparing, she said. The consultant overheard. Preparing for what? She met his gaze calmly. For us to underestimate it. Silence. The machines continued breathing for the captain. Outside the glass, security repositioned subtly after receiving a quiet directive, through their earpieces. The float nurse noticed that too. Her earlier phone call had not been long. It had not required many words. Just a name, and a location. Inside room 4, the air felt heavier now. The hospital still functioned. Patients still stabilized, charts still updated. But beneath the routine, a second rhythm had begun. Slow, deliberate. The captain's pulse steadied under her adjustments. He was conserving strength. Waiting. She checked the door one more time, then the ceiling vent, then the oxygen coupling. The consultants were still discussing optics. They had not yet understood. The patient in this room was not the only target. The ICU itself was being measured, mapped, tested, and the person they believed was temporary was already planning containment. The second outage did not look like an accident. It arrived at 1926. Not a blackout, a controlled failure. The overhead lights dimmed to emergency levels. Monitors switched to battery. The steady hum of the HVAC system cut out mid-breath. Silence pressed in. For half a second. For half a second. For half a second. For half a second. The other shrugged. Then alarms began. Infusion pumps beeped in staggered rhythm. A ventilator tore in room 6. Chirped sharply as it recalibrated airflow resistance. Down the hall, someone swore under their breath. The float nurse did not look at the lights. She was already at the ventilator in room 4. The other shrugged. Her fingers pressed the manual control before the automatic reset cycle could lag. Stay with me, she said quietly to the Ranger captain. His eyes were open. He did not panic. His oxygen saturation dipped from 98 to 94. She adjusted tidal volume manually, compensating for the temporary pressure imbalance caused by the HVAC shutdown. Respiratory, she called, calm and level. Room 4, manual support. The other shrugged. What happened? Airflow compensation delay, she said. Hold steady. The therapist took position opposite her. Together they stabilized the rhythm without raising their voices. Outside the room, the consultants were less composed. What is this? One demanded. Backup generators should be seamless. They are. The charge nurse replied sharply. This is internal. The 1927, the electronic charting system froze. Spinning cursor. No access. The float nurse did not glance at the tablet. The other shrugged. She had already memorized the last hour of vitals. The captain's blood pressure was holding at 108 systolic. Heart rate 82. Urine output adequate. She did not need the screen. She needed the room. The private security man stepped inside without asking. Is he stable? Yes. For how long? For now, he has absorbed that. Outside, the corridor lights remained dimmer than usual. Not enough to create panic, enough to create vulnerability. She stepped back from the ventilator once the rhythm stabilized. Switch to full manual logging, she told the respiratory therapist. Paper chart. He nodded, the other shrugged. Dead. Across the ICU, other nurses scrambled to re-establish digital access. Phones rang unanswered. Security radios crackled with overlapping voices. The float nurse stepped into the hallway. The ceiling camera above the ICU entrance was dark, not powered down completely. He checked his handheld device. Offline. He made the call. Inside room 4. The captain tracked her movements through the glass. He saw the shift in her posture. Less nurse, more perimeter. At 1931, a maintenance alert appeared on the wall panel near the gas lines. Pressure fluctuation. Minor, within tolerance. The respiratory, minor, within tolerance. That's new. She stepped to the panel. Read it out loud, she said. Central oxygen line microvariance. Could be sensor error. The faint metallic dust from earlier had increased. Not much. Enough. She rose. Switch to backup tank, she instructed quietly. The therapist blinked. Protocol requires it to switch. Her tone did not rise. The other shrugged. He complied. The captain's oxygen saturation held steady. If the central line failed now, they would not lose him. At 1934, the east corridor doors locked again. This time the red indicator did not switch back. A nurse from room 6 tried the handle. Why are we sealed in? She asked, voice tightening. The float nurse stepped toward the panel. Override still disabled. No audible alarm. Controlled isolation. Controlled isolation. The consultants were visibly rattled now. This is unacceptable, one said. Already dial, the other shrugged. In his phone. We were assured. The private security man cut him off. Stop talking about assurances. He turned to the float nurse. Is this targeted? She did not answer immediately. She scanned the hallway, counted staff. The other shrugged. 7 nurses, 2 respiratory therapists, 1 attending surgeon, 2 consultants, 1 security officer, and the patient in room 4. Yes, she said finally. The word landed without drama. The other shrugged. At 1936, a fire alarm triggered. Not in the ICU. 2 floors below. Evacuation protocol began to echo faintly through the building's PA system. The other shrugged. The charge nurse looked at her. They're going to try to move patients. Yes, the float nurse said. They cannot move him. The surgeon insisted. No, she agreed. The private security man stepped closer. If this escalates, we extract. She met his eyes. Extraction creates exposure. Staying creates containment failure. Not if we control the space. The fire alarm below ceased abruptly. Too abruptly. The PA system cut mid-sentence. The hallway lights flickered once more. The other shrugged. The float nurse walked back into room 4. The captain's gaze followed her like a tracking device. She leaned close. Someone is testing response time, she said quietly. The other shrugged. Do not react unless I tell you. His jaw tightened slightly around the tube. He understood. At 1940, the ICU doors buzzed. A request for entry. Badge authentication required. The security officer checked his handheld. Facilities supervisor, he said. Name, she asked. He read it. She shook her head slightly. Ask. He read it. She shook her head slightly. Ask him to state his last work order. The officer relayed the request, then a vague response. General inspection. She stepped to the intercom. State the work order number, she said calmly. Another pause, then static. The request withdrew. No one teared. The consultant stared at her. How did you know? One asked. I read logs, she replied. The private security man studied her more closely now. Not as staff, as asset. At 1944, the central oxygen pressure spiked briefly. Not enough to trigger a full alarm. Enough to cause turbulence in the ventilator flow. She was already compensating manually. The respiratory therapist watched her hands. You've done this before, he said quietly. Yes. Where? She did not answer. The other shrugged. The captain's vitals remained stable. He was conserving strength, breathing in controlled rhythm with the machine. The corridor doors remained locked. No official explanation. The float nurse stepped toward the nurse's station. She picked up the landline, dialed a number from memory. No hesitation. The call connected on the first ring. She spoke softly. Condition yellow. Controlled isolation. ICU level 3. Gas line interference confirmed. A pause. Yes. She hung up. The private security man had heard enough to understand. You are not just float, he said. She looked at him calmly. Tonight I am. At 1950. The corridor lights returned to full strength. The doors unlocked. The charting system flickered back online, as if nothing had happened. The consultants exhaled visibly. The other shrugged. Probably a grid test, one muttered. Coincidence, another added. The float nurse did not correct them. Inside room 4, the captain's eyes remained sharp. He had seen enough. He knew this was not random. She checked his arterial line again. Stable. She reconnected to central oxygen only after verifying pressure normalization, manually. No reliance on automated reassurance. The private security man stepped closer to her. Federal liaison is moving arrival to tonight, he said quietly. Good, she replied. You seem prepare. You seem prepare. You seem prepare. The other shrugged. D. I prefer not to be surprised twice. Twice. He almost smiled. Almost. At 1958. Security radios crackled with confirmation. Building systems stabilized. No active fire. No external breach. Official narrative forming already. Glitch. Test. Temporary fault. The float nurse removed the folded gauze with metallic dust from her pocket. She placed it in a sealed specimen bag. Labeled it with time and room number. No commentary. Evidence the captain watched her do it. Recognition deepened. He knew precision when he saw it. At 20:05, the ICU settled into uneasy calm. Staff resumed documentation. Consultants resumed quiet calls. But something had changed. The private security man now stood inside the ICU doors, rather than outside them. The security officer was less rigid, more alert. The charge nurse approached her quietly. What are we dealing with? She asked. Escalation. The float nurse replied. Toward what? Access. To him. Yes. The charge nurse swallowed. And you? She paused, then answered carefully. I will not let them move him. The captain's eyes never left her. The first phase had been a flicker. A test of systems, a measurement of response. The second phase would not be so subtle. She adjusted the crash cart again, 2 inches closer. She repositioned the supply cabinet slightly, creating a narrower corridor angle near the ICU entrance. No one noticed, except the captain. The other shrugged. He understood terrain shaping. At 2017, a message arrived on the security officer's device. Federal liaison on site. 5 minutes out. The consultants straightened their jackets reflexively. The float nurse washed her hands. Slow, methodical. The building had gone dark for less than 10 minutes. No injuries. No casualties. But the message was clear. The other shrugged. Someone was mapping weakness. Testing gas lines. Testing doors. Testing response. And now they knew the ICU would not break easily. The ranger captain closed his eyes briefly. Not from sedation, the other shrugged. From calculation. When he opened them again, he looked at her differently. Not as caregiver. Not as staff. As command. The consultants still did not see it. They saw a nurse who had remained calm, competent, useful. The other shrugged. The federal liaison's footsteps echoed faintly down the corridor. The next phase was arriving. The float nurse stood at the bedside, hands steady on the rail. The crisis had begun to show its shape, and she was already ahead of it. The federal liaison did not introduce himself loudly. He arrived at 2024 wearing a dark jacket, with no visible insignia, and a hospital visitor badge clipped too precisely to be casual. He moved like someone accustomed to rooms changing when he entered them. The consultants approached him first, voices low, controlled urgency. System irregularities. One said, temporary lockdown. Likely internal. Likely, the liaison asked. The private security man answered instead, targeted probing. The liaison's eyes shifted past them. He looked through the ICU glass wall. At the patient, then at the float nurse standing beside him. Then at the float nurse standing beside him. She did not acknowledge him. She was checking the arterial waveform for dampening. The liaison stepped inside the unit after sanitizing his hands without being asked. He stopped at the foot of the bed. Status, he asked. Post-operative. Stable, manual oxygen backup, engaged during central fluctuation. Currently within range, she said. No embellishment. No attempt to impress. He studied her badge. The other shrugged. Float. Yes. He looked at the captain. The captain looked back without flinching. Recognition passed between them. Small. Contained. The liaison nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Then he turned back to the consultants. From this point forward, movement decisions are restricted. The consultant stiffened. Restricted by whom? By risk assessment. That is not an answer. It is the only one you will receive tonight. Silence followed. The float nurse adjusted the IV pump rate by 0.2 micrograms. The liaison watched her hands. Steady. Measured. He did not ask questions he already knew answers to. At 20:41, the ICU doors buzzed again. The other shrugged. Another badge request. Security checked the name. Night Environmental Services, the officer called out. Hall. The float nurse said immediately. The other shrugged. The liaison looked at her. Reason. Cleaning cycle for this wing is at 23:30, she replied. The charge nurse nodded. She's right. 10 seconds later, the request disappeared from the system. No follow-up. No argument. The liaison stepped closer to her. The other shrugged. You have access to scheduling logs. Yes. Why? I read them. He studied her for a long second, then nodded slightly. Continue. At 20:56, the corridor camera feed returned online. The security officer checked his device. Camera 4 restored. Check timestamp continuity, she said. He scrolled. There's a gap. 11 minutes, the other shrugged. Preserve it, the liaison ordered. The consultants were losing patience. This is turning into theater, one muttered. We cannot hold this unit hostage. This unit is already a target. The consultant's jaw tightened. Based on what evidence? She held up the sealed specimen bag, containing metallic dust. The other shrugged. Gas line interference. He looked at the bag as if it were abstract art. That could be anything detection would have. Inside the room, the captain's breathing remained synchronized with the ventilator. He tracked every voice, every shift in tone. At 21:12, the building lights flickered again. Shorter this time, the other shrugged. More surgical. The ICU did not lose full power. Only one bank of overhead lights dimmed, specifically the section nearest room 4. The other shrugged. The float nurse did not look up. She watched the reflection of the ceiling in the glass monitor screen instead. Movement. A shadow near the vent above the hallway junction. Too controlled to be coincidence. She stepped into the corridor without haste. The liaison followed. At the intersection near the supply closet, a man in scrubs stood with a clipboard. Mid-30s, hospital logo embroidered on chest, slightly off-center. He looked up as they approached. Routine inspection, he said. Of what? She asked. Ventilation. Work order number. He hesitated. Filed earlier. His eyes flicked briefly toward the stairwell door. The liaison noticed. So did she. Badge, she said calmly. He handed it over. The laminate was correct. The other shrugged. The photo was correct, but the magnetic strip edge was worn in a way hospital-issue badges were not. She held it up to the light. Where did you print this? She asked. He did not answer. The liaison stepped slightly to his left, locking the stairwell. The man shifted his weight. His right hand tightened around the clipboard. Not aggressive. Calculating. She spoke evenly. Put the clipboard down. He did not move. The corridor was quiet now. The consultants watched from behind the glass. Staff inside the ICU sensed something without understanding. The float nurse took one step closer, close enough to reduce his reaction window. Her voice remained level. If you run, you will not clear. The stairwell. It was not a threat. It was assessment. The man's breathing changed. Subtle. She saw it. The liaison saw it. The liaison saw it. The man moved. Not toward the stairwell. Toward the supply closet. She was faster. Not with force. With positioning. She stepped into his path before he completed the pivot. Her hand closed around his wrist. Not violently. Just enough to redirect momentum. The clipboard fell. The liaison secured his other arm. No shouting. No shouting. No struggle beyond 3 controlled seconds. Security arrived moments later, weapons unholstered but not raised. The man went still. The float nurse released her grip immediately once control was established. She stepped back. "Check his hands," she said quietly. Security rolled up his sleeves, thin adhesive residue near his wrist, as if something had been recently removed. A device? Small. Concealable. The liaison's expression hardened. "Search the closet," he ordered. Inside, behind stacked saline boxes, they found a compact signal repeater taped beneath the lowest shelf. Active battery-powered routing something. The consultant stared in disbelief. The other shrugged. "This is impossible," one whispered. "No," the float nurse said softly. "It is precise." The intruder was escorted out without spectacle. The ICU doors sealed behind him. Silence settled again. The liaison turned to her. "You moved before he did." "Yes. Training. Experience. Experience." He held her gaze, then gave the smallest nod of acknowledgement. Inside room 4, the captain's heart rate had not spiked. Not once. He had watched the entire encounter through the glass reflection. She returned to his bedside. Checked his incision. Dry. Stable. Stable. "You are secure," she said quietly. His eyes held hers longer this time. Recognition no longer subtle. At 21:40, a quiet briefing occurred in the core. The other shrugged. "NER of the ICU." The liaison spoke in controlled tones. "Preliminary assessment. Targeted infrastructure interference. Objective likely forced relocation during system instability." The consultant swallowed. The other shrugged. "Why?" The liaison did not answer directly. Instead, he looked toward the captain. The implication was clear. The float nurse remained beside the bed. Not part of the circle. Not excluded either. The other shrugged. At 22:05, security presence doubled. Unmarked vehicles arrived outside. Corridor traffic was restricted without public announcement. The hospital began quietly rerouting non-essential staff. The crisis had shifted from flicker to contact, and it had been contained. Not by force. By anticipation, the charge nurse approached her. "You knew," she said quietly. "You knew," she said quietly. "I suspected." "You did not seem surprised." "I prefer preparation." The nurse studied her. "You are not temporary." She adjusted the IV tubing again. "Tonight I am." The Ranger captain closed his eyes briefly. "Not from fatigue," the other shrugged. "From decision." When he opened them again, his gaze carried something heavier. Trust. Outside the ICU glass, the consultants were quieter now. Their certainty had thinned, 3 inches from the door. Exactly where she wanted it. The liaison approached her before stepping out. "This is not over," he said. "No," she agreed. "You will remain on shift." "Yes." Then, barely audible. "Understood." He left. They had underestimated observation, and they had been stopped without a single raised voice. The float nurse stood beside the Ranger captain. Machines breathed. "Sir." Security tightened. Consultants recalculated. The crisis had moved from probing to pressure. The next move would not test systems. It would test decisions. And she was already preparing for it. The other shrugged. The ICU did not return to normal. It adjusted. That was more dangerous. After the intruder was removed, conversations lowered instead of rising. Doors stayed closed. Doors stayed closed longer than necessary. Security officers changed positions without announcing the shift. The consultants stopped using the word coincidence. At 22:18, the hospital fire panel triggered again. This time on the same floor. The other shrugged. A different zone. Smoke detection near a storage wing that did not connect directly to the ICU. The alarm was not loud. It was procedural, a calm, recorded voice instructing staff to prepare for possible evacuation. The charge nurse looked at the float nurse before looking at anyone else. "They will try to move him now," she said. "Yes?" The float nurse replied. The surgeon arrived within 2 minutes, already irritated. "I will not transport him through unsecured corridors," he said flatly. The private security man countered. "If there is fire risk." "There is no fire," the float nurse said. They all looked at her. She did not elaborate. She walked to the wall panel displaying zone alerts. The other shrugged. The smoke detection was localized to a supply annex. No heat signature spike. No sprinkler activation. Only sensor activation. "Sensor triggered," she said calmly. "Not combustion." The other shrugged. You are not certified to interpret. She turned slightly toward him. Do you smell smoke? Silence. The PA system continued its calm instructions. Prepare for relocation. The other shrugged. Prepare for patient transfer. The private security man's jaw tightened. If this spreads, it will not, she said. You cannot guarantee. The other shrugged. That. No, she agreed. But I can calculate probability. He studied her. Based on what? Pattern. She stepped back into room 4. The ranger captain's eyes were open. Alert. He had heard enough. She adjusted his IV sedation slightly downward. Not enough to cause distress. Enough to keep him fully conscious. If they order movement, she said quietly. I will contest. He blinked once. Understood. At 22:24, hospital administration called the ICU directly. The charge nurse answered, Yes, we are aware. No visible smoke. Understood. She hung up slowly. They want room 4 prepped for relocation. To private surgical wing, she said. The consultant nodded as if this confirmed his authority. Good. Controlled transfer. The surgeon shook his head. Absolutely not. The private security man looked at the float nurse. Assessment. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she traced the ventilator tubing again. Checked arterial pressure. The other shrugged. Examined incision stability. Then she stepped into the hallway. Close the ICU doors, she said to security. They're all ready. Close them manually. The security officer complied. The other shrugged. The double doors sealed with a heavier finality. The consultant's voice sharpened. The other shrugged. You do not have authority to lock down a medical unit. She turned to him calmly. He does not survive a corridor breach. That is speculative. The other shrugged. It is statistical. The fire alarm panel flickered once, then cleared. No escalation. No secondary zone. The PA system cut off mid-sentence again. Too clean. Too precise. False alarm confirmed, a voice reported. Sensor malfunction. The float nurse nodded once. They wanted us to move him, she said. No one argued this time. The liaison returned to the ICU. He had not left the building. Status? He asked. Attempted displacement, she replied. He looked at the surgeon. Medical stability risk. The surgeon said firmly the liaison absorbed that. Then he looked at the float nurse. Your assessment. Movement creates exposure corridor approximately 80 meters long. She said evenly. 2 elevator choke points. 1 blind stairwell intersection. We have already identified internal badge compromise. The consultant stared at her. How do you know the corridor length? I counted. Silence. The liaison's expression shifted slightly. Recommendation, he asked her. Contain here. The consultant stepped forward. This is not a tactical operation. This is a hospital. She met his gaze without heat. It is both. The room went quiet. The ranger captain watched the exchange through the glass. He did not move. He did not need to. At 20 exchange through the glass. He did not move. He did not need to. At 22:36, the liaison made a decision. No transfer, he said. The consultant bristled. The other shrugged. You do not have executive authority over this institution. The liaison's voice remained level. Tonight I do. The consultant looked from him to the float nurse. Understanding began to form. Not complete, but uncomfortable. The float nurse stepped into the stairwell. Closed the door behind her. The air was cooler there. Concrete walls. No cameras. She removed her hospital badge slowly. Looked at it. Temporary, uneven cut. She slipped it into her pocket. Then she dialed another number from memory. The call connected immediately. Escalation confirmed, she said quietly. Displacement attempt via false alarm. The other shrugged. Internal assistance probable. Recommend perimeter reinforcement level 2. A pause. Yes. She listened. Her expression did not change. Understood, she said finally. The other shrugged. Ended the call, reattached her badge, returned to the ICU. No one asked where she had gone, but the liaison noticed. At 22:48, unmarked vehicles repositioned outside the hospital. The other shrugged. The security officer's radio chatter shifted tone. Less confusion, more coordination. The float nurse resumed her place at the bedside. The captain's eyes searched hers briefly. His gaze steadied. At 23:05, a respiratory alert triggered. Sudden pressure drop in the central line. She had anticipated it. Switch to tank, she instructed immediately. Already prepared, the other shrugged. The therapist complied without hesitation. The captain's oxygen saturation dipped only 2 points before stabilizing. The consultant stared at the panel. "This is deliberate," he whispered. "Yes," she said. The liaison moved to the gas control room with security. Inspection revealed microabrasion along a coupling seam. Tampered. Not catastrophic. Calculated. Enough to force relocation if unnoticed. But she had noticed. The other shrugged. Back in the ICU, she adjusted the ventilator manually for the 3rd time that night. No frustration. No visible strain. Only precision. The charge nurse approached her quietly. "You saved him," she said. She shook her head slightly. "Not yet." The captain's pulse remained steady. He watched her hands, her posture, her breathing. He recognized discipline. Not theatrical. Not aggressive. Contained. At 23. 22. The consultants requested a private conversation with the liaison. Voices low. Urgent. Through the glass, she could see their expressions change. More caution. The liaison glanced toward her once during the exchange. A subtle acknowledgement. Inside room 4, she leaned close to the captain. "They will try once more," she said quietly. His eyes narrowed, slightle. The other shrugged. "Not tonight," she added. He relaxed. Fractionally. At 23:40, the building system stabilized fully. No alarms, no flickers, no badge anomalies. Too smooth. The quiet after pressure, she did not trust it. The private security man stepped beside her. "You anticipated the gas line," he said. "Yes." "How?" "How?" "Earlier dust." "You were not surprised by the false alarm either." "No." "Why?" "Pattern repetition is escalation." He studied her. The other shrugged. "Different buildings." That was all. At 03, midnight passed without incident. The ICU lights held steady. The captain drifted into controlled rest, not sedation. Rest. She reduced analgesia slightly to avoid respiratory suppression. Small decisions. Accumulated advantage. The liaison approached her before leaving the unit. "Perimeter reinforced," he said quietly. "Internal audit underway." She nodded. He hesitated. "Your chain." She looked at him. "Calm. Intact." He accepted that. Calm. Intact. As he turned to leave, he paused briefly at the foot of the captain's bed. Their eyes met. Recognition passed between them. Rank unspoken. Respect unspoken. Then the liaison stepped out. The consultants no longer spoke loudly. They moved carefully now, watching her, reassessing. The float nurse checked the door locks. One more time. Adjusted the crash cart again. 1 inch. Almost nothing. The captain opened his eyes, looked at her, not as patient, as peer. She met his gaze steadily. Containment had held. Displacement had failed. Containment had held. Displacement had failed. Authority had shifted quietly inside the room. No announcement. No declaration. Only control. And the night was not finished yet. The quiet after midnight was not rest. It was compression. Pressure building without visible movement. The ICU bites were steady. The monitors displayed stable rhythms. Security presence had doubled but blended into the background like part of the architecture. At 0:37, the first sign appeared. Not an alarm. A delay. A ventilator in room 4 hesitated between cycles. Less than half a second. Most staff would not have noticed. She did. The other shrugged. Her hand was already on the manual control before the second hesitation came. The Ranger captain's chest rose in measured rhythm, but the waveform on the screen showed resistance variability. Not lung resistance. System resistance. She switched to manual mode smoothly. No urgency in her voice. Respiratory. She called quietly. The therapy. She called quietly. The therapy, she said. Not pulmonary. The therapist frowned at the display. It's reading normal. It is not. She adjusted the inspiratory pressure slightly. The captain's oxygen saturation held at 96. Acceptable, the other shrugged, but not ideal. She traced the tubing visually from the ventilator to the central wall source. No visible kinks. No condensation blockage. She moved to the gas panel again. Pressure gauge within normal limits. Too normal. Switch to tank, she said. We just stabilized the central. Switch. Her tone did not change. The therapist complied. As soon as the backup tank engaged, the therapist complied. As soon as the backup tank engaged, the waveform smoothed, but real. The therapist looked at her. You were right. Yes. Outside the room, the consultant who had doubted her earlier stepped closer to the glass. What now? He asked sharply. Now we breathe manually, she said. The captain's eyes were open, fully alert. He could feel the change in airflow. He did not fight the tube. He conserved energy. At 0:44, the central oxygen pressure display flickered, then corrected itself. The liaison's voice came off. The other shrugged. The security radio. Gas control room clear. No visible tampering. She did not respond to the radio. She was studying the ventilator's internal diagnostics. A tiny fluctuation in calibration settings. The other shrugged. Barely outside baseline. Enough to create progressive instability if left unchecked. She opened the calibration menu. Locked. Password protected. The therapist looked at her. Only biomedical engineering has access. Call them, she said. They are off-site. Wake them. He made the call. No answer. She looked at the captain. Stay steady, she said quietly. His pulse was rising slightly now. Not panic. Adrenaline. She adjusted analgesia by the smallest increment, maintaining clarity without stress spike. At 0:51, the ventilator alarm finally triggered. Low priority, the other shrugged. Airflow variance. The consultants reacted immediately. This is unacceptable, one said. We move him. No, she replied calmly. The other shrugged. You cannot keep overriding systems without authorization. She met his gaze evenly. I am preventing respiratory collapse. That is not your decision alone. The charge nurse stepped closer to her. What do you need? She asked. A portable ventilator, she said. Independent unit, she said. A portable ventilator, she said. Independent unit, no central connection. I don't central connection. That is for transport. Bring it. The nurse moved without hesitation. The liaison entered the ICU again. Report. Ventilator calibration interference, she said. Central line pressure manipulation. Pattern escalation. Is he in danger? Yes. She and the therapist worked together to transition the captain carefully. Every movement measured to avoid destabilizing the surgical repair. On my count, she said. The therapist nodded. 1. Pause. 2. The captain's chest rose smoothly under the independent unit. Oxygen saturation climbed back to 98. Stable. The central ventilator remained powered but idle. She stepped to it, examined the rear panel. The tamper seal was intact. Too intact. She ran her finger lightly along the casing edge. Microscopic separation near one screw. Someone had opened it. Carefully. Biomedical did not log service, she said quietly. The liaison's expression hardened. This is internal access. Yes. The consultant's voice shook slightly now. How many failures are we dealing with? Gas line. Badge system. Ventilator. The pattern was no longer probing. It was execution. The captain watched her from the bed. His breathing now fully controlled by the independent unit. He had not spoken since surgery, but his eyes were sharp. Present. At 1:03, a new alarm sounded. Not from room 4, from room 6. Another ventilator instability. The charge nurse looked toward her. Coincidence? She asked quietly. The other shrugged. No, she said. She moved to room 6 briefly. Checked the waveform. Identical hesitation. She switched that patient to manual tank support as well. 2 rooms now disconnected from central flow. This is coordinated, the liaison said. Yes. The consultant looked pale. What do they want? She answered without hesitation. Movement. The consultant swallowed. The other shrugged. And if we do not move, they escalate. At 1:14, the central oxygen panel alarmed loudly. Full pressure drop. Red indicator the ICU filled with alarm tones. Other rooms began to register airflow issues. She stepped into the hallway. Close the main valve, she instructed security. That cuts supply to the entire floor. Yes. They will suffocate. Call. Close it. Shrugged. Close it. The security officer hesitated only a fraction before complying. The central supply shut off. Silence replaced the alarm. Every ventilated patient now dependent on local tanks. The float nurse moved room to room. Calm. Methodical. Switching each patient to independent supply. No wasted motion. No raised voice. The consultant stood frozen. liability calculations running through their heads. She returned to room 4. The captain's oxygen saturation remained steady. She met his eyes. "We control air now," she said softly. His gaze held steady. "Trust." At 1:28, the liaison's radio crackled again. Gas control breach confirmed. A voice reported, "Remote actuator triggered from internal terminal." The consultant looked at her. "You were right." She did not respond. The cost of being right was unfolding in real time. Manual tanks had limited duration. 2 hours at current flow. Less if stress increased. She recalculated silently. Adjusted tidal volumes to conserve oxygen, without compromising gas exchange. The therapist watched her. "You are optimizing consumption," he said quietly. The other shrugged. "Yes." "How long?" 90 minutes safe margin. The liaison stepped closer. "External teams are sweeping the building." "Good," she said. "If they fail," she looked at him. "Then we do not fail." At 1:42, the captain's blood pressure dipped slightly. Fatigue. Stress. She adjusted fluids carefully. Too much would strain surgical repair. 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 Too much. Too little would reduce perfusion. Balance, always balance. The consultant approached her hesitantly. "If something goes wrong legally," she looked at him calmly. "If something goes wrong, he dies." He fell silent. At 1:55, security reported a suspect detained in the sub-basement mechanical room, attempting remote system access. The liaison nodded once. "Containment holding," he said. But the ventilator calibration issue remained. The central system was compromised. The portable unit would sustain him temporarily, not indefinitely. She made a decision. The other shrugged. "Disconnect central ventilator completely," she said. "That requires full shutdown." The therapist replied, "Do it." The liaison gave a small nod. Authorization without paperwork. The other shrugged. The central ventilator was powered down and unplugged. Eliminated as variable, the captain remained on independent support. Manual control. Direct. No remote interference possible. Manual control. At 2:07, the alarm stopped. No more pressure drops. No more calibration flickers. The building exhaled, but oxygen reserves continued to tick downward silently. She checked the tank gauge, but oxygen reserves continued to tick downward silently. 70%. She adjusted again to extend duration. Every breath calculated. The charge nurse stepped beside her. "You have taken full responsibility," she said quietly. "Yes. If this fails, I understand." Loss of license. Career. Identity. She understood the cost. She accepted it. The captain's eyes softened slightly. He knew sacrifice when he saw it. At 2:22, external teams confirmed system isolation. Remote actuator disabled. Mechanical access secured. Central gas control under guard. The liaison approached her. Pressure stabilized. Central safe to re-engage. She did not move immediately. She waited 30 seconds, watched the captain's waveform. Listened. Then she nodded. Re-engaged slowly. The valve reopened gradually. Pressure returned incrementally. She did not switch him back to central supply immediately. She observed for full stability first. 5 minutes, 10. No fluctuation. Only then did she transition him carefully back to central oxygen. The waveform held. Stable. The portable tank read 40%. She allowed herself one slow breath. Not relief. Verification. The consultant stepped toward her. "You overrode protocol," he said quietly. "Yes." "You shut down an entire floor." "Yes." "You could have been wrong." He said nothing more. At 2:41, the ICU settled again. Systems stabilized. Suspect detained. Gas line secured. The liaison stood at the foot of the bed. He looked at the captain. Then at her. "You accepted command," he said quietly. "I accepted responsibility." He held her gaze. Recognition passed between them again. Unspoken. Formal. The captain lifted his hand slightly from the bed. Weak. She placed her hand beneath his, steadying it without drawing attention. A small gesture. Heavy with meaning. He squeezed once. Not as patient, as acknowledgement. She released his hand gently. Adjusted the ventilator one final time. The crisis had escalated from flicker to suffocation. And containment had held. But oxygen had not been the real objective. It had been pressure. On systems. On staff. On her. 252. Night not finished. The pattern suggested one more move. Not mechanical. Personal. And she was ready for it. By 3:10, the hospital looked calm again. Too calm. The other shrugged. The ICU lights were steady. The central oxygen system had been secured. Security officers stood at measured intervals along the corridor. The detained suspect had been removed from the building. On paper, the crisis had been contained. In reality, it had shifted. The ranger captain was stable but exhausted. The strain of fluctuating ventilation and adrenaline line had cost him more than the monitors showed. His blood pressure required minimal support again. His respiration, though controlled, carried a subtle fatigue. She adjusted the bed angle slightly to reduce diaphragmatic effort. Small corrections. Always small. The liaison returned with a different posture now. Less reaction, more conclusion. "They know we reinforced," he said quietly. The other shrugged. "Yes," she replied. "They will adapt." "Yes," the other shrugged. Federal agents were sweeping internal systems floor by floor. IT was isolating terminals. Badge credentials were being reissued in controlled batches. The building was tightening, and tightening meant pressure elsewhere. At 3:24, the liaison's secure phone vibrated. He stepped aside to answer.